Throughout the winding corridors of human memory, certain names echo louder than others. Kings and emperors, prophets and conquerors, artists and inventors. History remembers them for their power, their visions, or their creations. But sometimes, it also remembers the shadows. There are groups and societies that lived not in the light of glory, but in the murk of secrecy, in the twilight where myths grow taller than men. Among these, one name whispers through centuries with a peculiar weight: the assassins. Their story begins not with the clang of swords or the banners of conquest, but with whispers carried through mountain passes of Persia. To their enemies, they were the Hashashin, a word that still carries a sharp edge in modern languages. To their followers, they were the faithful, the guardians of a particular vision of Islam, the executors of divine justice. To outsiders, especially to the crusaders who crossed their path, they became almost supernatural beings, part legend, part nightmare. The assassins were not merely killers. They were something stranger, something subtler. They did not rely on armies. They did not march in mass formations. Their empire was built of ideas, loyalty, and a handful of blades directed with exquisite precision. Where others needed thousands of soldiers, the assassins could tilt the balance of power with one devoted follower, placed at the right moment, at the right place, with a dagger hidden under his robe. This introduction is not meant to dazzle with fast action, but to set the mood. Imagine yourself in a candlelit chamber. Outside, the wind brushes against stone walls. The air is heavy with incense and secrecy. Someone begins to tell you a story, their voice calm, deliberate, almost hypnotic. That is the rhythm we will follow as we descend into the world of the assassins. Legends and reality. When we speak of the assassins, we immediately encounter a problem. Where does history end and myth begin? Medieval chroniclers were not impartial. Crusaders, terrified and fascinated, exaggerated tales of these mysterious Eastern sectarians. Muslim rulers, who were often their targets, demonized them to justify campaigns of extermination. Later European writers, hearing echoes of these stories, embroidered them even further, painting the assassins as mystical drug addicts, slaves of illusions, pawns in some larger game. And yet, behind the fog of rumor, there was something real. The assassins were the Nizari Ismailis, a branch of Shura Islam, who in the late 11th century found themselves cornered politically and militarily. Their survival depended not on strength in numbers but on cleverness, strategy, and the ability to inspire awe and fear far beyond their actual size. Under their enigmatic leader, Hashashin Sabah, they carved out a stronghold in the rugged mountains of northern Persia, and from there they reached across the Middle East with a hidden hand. To study the assassins is to wander between history and legend. Some of what we know is true, documented by chroniclers close to events. Some of it is distorted, bent by fear or propaganda. Some of it, especially the lurid tales of gardens of paradise and intoxicating herbs, may have been inventions of their enemies. And yet, the very fact that these myths survived tells us something. The assassins were not only actors in history, they were curators of their own legend, letting imagination serve as part of their power. Why they fascinate us. It has been nearly 1,000 years since Hashashin Sabah first raised his banner over the fortress of Alamut. The dynasty of the assassins was crushed by Mongols in the 13th century, their castles razed, their networks scattered. And yet, their memory is undying. The word assassin itself, born from their name, has entered every language as a synonym for killer. We cannot speak of political murders, of shadowy plots, of secret agents without feeling the echo of their legacy. But fascination with the assassins goes deeper than their violence. They represent a kind of hidden history, one that is not written on marble triumphal arches or celebrated in glorious epics. Their power lay in being unseen until the decisive moment. In a world dominated by empires and crusades, by great armies and vast treasuries, the assassins proved that fear, reputation, and absolute devotion could stand against overwhelming force. For modern audiences, especially those who sense that history is not only the tale of kings, they stand as symbols of the invisible threads that shape events. A journey for sleep. As we begin this long exploration, let the pace be gentle. This is not a story to be rushed through. The assassins deserve the lingering attention of someone half awake, ready to drift into thought as much as into dreams. Each name, each place, each fragment of myth will be unfolded like a page slowly turned in a dim light. We will travel to the fortress of Alamut, high in the Persian mountains, where Hassanai-Sabah established his citadel of faith and strategy. We will meet the initiates, sworn to loyalty, trained to surrender everything for their mission. We will watch them walk calmly into death, knowing that their sacrifice would ripple across kingdoms. We will hear the tales crusaders told of them, stories of wonder and terror carried back to Europe. And we will witness the day when Mongol armies, vast and merciless, finally broke the walls of their empire. This is not only the chronicle of a sect. It is also a meditation on secrecy, power, and memory. For though the assassins vanished, their shadow lingers in every tale of spies, secret orders, or conspiracies. Every whisper about hidden societies owes something to their legend. The atmosphere of mystery. Imagine the mountains of Daylam in northern Persia. The air is thin, the slopes steep. At night, torches gleam faintly on walls of stone. Somewhere in those halls, initiates kneel, reciting oaths in low voices. A master speaks to them of duty, of destiny, of sacrifice. Outside, enemies plot their destruction. Inside, silence reigns, broken only by the rustle of robes, the clink of steel. That is where our story begins, in the tension between silence and violence, between prayer and the dagger, between faith and fear. To understand the assassins, one must not only read chronicles but also feel that atmosphere, the hush of conspiracy, the stillness before a decisive act. Their history is as much about psychology as about politics. They wielded belief as others wielded swords. Looking ahead. This introduction is the threshold. From here, each chapter will carry us deeper into the rise of Hassanai-Sabah, the philosophy of the Nazaris, the methods of recruitment and indoctrination, the legendary assassinations that shook caliphs and crusaders alike, the dramatic fall under Mongol siege, and the lingering echoes in language and myth. The assassins remain dangerous not because they survive, but because their idea survives. The idea that a handful of committed individuals, guided by a vision, can alter the course of history. Whether you view them as zealots, heroes, or monsters, they refuse to be forgotten. And so, with shadows gathered around us and the night deepening, let us step into their world. Let us walk slowly through the corridors of Alamut, past watchful guards and hidden daggers, toward the chamber where Hassanai-Sabah waits, a man of iron will and endless patience, whose name would echo in fear for centuries. High in the mountains of northern Persia, where jagged ridges cut the sky and valleys sink into shadow, there once stood a fortress whose name would echo across centuries: Alamut. It was more than stone walls and battlements. It was the heart of a vision, the refuge of a persecuted sect, and the birthplace of a legend that would ripple far beyond the Middle East. To understand the assassins, we must first understand Alamut. The story of their origins is not only about a sect of Islam, nor even about their charismatic leader Hashashin Sabah. It is about a place, a citadel carved into rock, that became the symbol of endurance and secrecy. The land of Daylam. The region known as Daylam, stretching along the southern coast of the Caspian Sea, was wild and rugged. Its mountains were steep, its paths treacherous, its people fiercely independent. For centuries, Daylam had been a refuge for dissidents, rebels, and sects fleeing the authority of larger empires. Armies found it hard to conquer. Roads twisted unpredictably, and forests offered cover for ambushes. It was here that the Nizari Ismailis found their sanctuary. Driven from cities, harried by the powerful Seljuk Turks, they sought a place where they could survive against overwhelming odds. Alamut was their answer. Perched like an eagle's nest on a narrow ridge, the fortress commanded views of the valleys below. Whoever held Alamut could see enemies coming from miles away. Hashashin Sabah's vision. Hashashin Sabah, the man who would become the founder of the Assassin Order, was no ordinary figure. Born in the city of Qom, or perhaps Ray, he was drawn early to the esoteric teachings of the Ismaili branch of Shura Islam. Brilliant, disciplined, and utterly devoted, he soon became a missionary for the cause, traveling across Persia to spread his message. But Hassan was also pragmatic. He knew that ideas needed shelter, that a persecuted sect could not survive on preaching alone. He envisioned a stronghold where faith and strategy could unite, where a handful of the faithful could resist the armies of empires. In the late 11th century, he fixed his eyes on Alamut, a fortress then in the hands of local rulers. Through a mixture of persuasion, infiltration, and cunning, Hassan gained control of Alamut around the year 1090. Chroniclers tell us that he entered quietly, converting inhabitants, planting loyal followers, and finally revealing his hand when the time was right. By the time his enemies understood what had happened, Alamut was already his. The fortress itself. Descriptions of Alamut vary, but all agree on its formidable position. Built on a narrow rock outcrop, it was accessible only by steep paths. Its walls rose sheer against the cliffs, and its towers overlooked the valleys like watchful eyes. Within its walls were storehouses, reservoirs, armories, and libraries. Hashashin Sabah, meticulous in planning, ensured that Alamut could withstand long sieges. Legends speak of vast underground tunnels, secret passages, and chambers filled with books and scrolls. Some claim that Hassan assembled one of the greatest libraries of the medieval world, filled not only with religious texts but with works of science, philosophy, and mathematics. Whether these accounts are exaggerated or not, they capture the spirit of Alamut, a place of both defense and knowledge, where faith and intellect stood side by side. The community of believers. At Alamut, Hassan forged more than a fortress. He built a community. His followers were bound not by tribal ties or wealth but by belief. They called themselves Fidoi, those who sacrificed themselves. Their loyalty was absolute. Hassan enforced strict discipline, forbidding indulgence, demanding obedience, and cultivating an atmosphere of devotion. Life in Alamut was austere. No luxury, no frivolity. Food was simple, routines rigid. Hassan himself lived with the same severity he imposed on others. Chroniclers tell us that he punished his own sons when they broke rules, proving that no one, not even his family, was above the order. This harshness was not cruelty but strategy. In a world where they were vastly outnumbered, survival required discipline sharper than any sword. A seed of fear. From Alamut, Hassan began to shape the tool that would make his community known: selective, targeted assassination. But in these early years, it was not yet about daggers in marketplaces or blades flashing in royal courts. It was about building reputation. The very existence of Alamut sent a message. Here was a sect that could not be crushed, that could defy sultans and armies from its eagle's nest. Rumors began to swirl. Enemies whispered about the fanatical devotion of Hassan's followers, about their willingness to die without hesitation. Stories spread faster than truth. By the time the first high-profile killings were attributed to them, the assassins already lived in the minds of rulers as a force more terrifying than their numbers could justify. The symbolism of Alamut. Why does Alamut matter so much in the story of the assassins? Because it was more than geography, it was psychology. It embodied their defiance, their secrecy, their endurance. To their enemies, Alamut was a thorn impossible to remove. To their followers, it was the house of knowledge and faith, a fortress blessed by divine protection. To history, it became a stage upon which one of the strangest dramas of the Middle Ages unfolded. Even centuries after its fall to the Mongols, the name Alamut still carries resonance. In Persian, it means eagle's nest. The eagle soars alone, high above the earth, fierce and untouchable. That image perfectly captured what Hassan Sabah intended: a community apart, secure in the heights, swooping down when least expected. Looking ahead. In this chapter, we have lingered on the beginnings, the rugged land of Daylam, the vision of Hassan Sabah, and the fortress of Alamut as both sanctuary and symbol. From here, the story will deepen. We will explore the doctrines that bound the assassins together, the philosophy that turned them from a sect into a movement, and the rituals that fascinated and horrified outsiders. But remember, every tale that follows, every assassination, every negotiation, every clash with crusaders or caliphs, has its roots here, in this mountain fortress. Alamut was the seed from which the legend grew. Without Alamut, there would have been no assassins. So as the night stretches long, imagine the mountains under moonlight, the fortress walls gleaming faintly against the sky. Within those walls, a man of unbending will plots the survival of his people. Outside, the world turns, unaware that from this eagle's nest will fly whispers, daggers, and legends that no empire can silence. When most people hear the word assassin, they imagine daggers in the dark, masked killers, and sudden deaths of rulers. But the true heart of the order was not the blade, it was belief. To understand the assassins, we must turn away from their dramatic deeds and listen instead to their philosophy, their vision of faith, and the ideas that sustained them long after weapons were laid aside. The Nizari Ismailis, the community that became known as the Assassins, were not merely rebels against the Seljuk state. They were part of a deeper current within Islam, a current of interpretation, symbolism, and esoteric knowledge. Their philosophy was both their shield and their sword. It bound them together more firmly than iron chains, and it gave them the courage to face certain death with serenity. The Ismaili tradition. The Ismaili branch of Sharia Islam traces its roots to disputes over succession in the early centuries of the faith. Sharia Muslims believe that the leadership of the Muslim community should have passed not to elected caliphs, but to the family of the Prophet Muhammad, his cousin and son-in-law Ali, and Ali's descendants. Over time, disagreements about which descendants were legitimate created divisions within Shi'ism. The Ismailis followed a line of imams descended from Ismail, the son of the sixth imam. Their doctrine emphasized that true understanding of God's revelation required guidance by a living imam, a spiritual leader who held secret knowledge of the divine will. This belief set them apart from both the Sunni majority and other Shi'a groups. By the 11th century, the Ismailis had established a powerful state in Egypt, ruled by the Fatimid caliphs. But far away in Persia, their followers lived under the domination of the Seljuk Turks, who were Sunni and hostile to Shi'a minorities. It was here, amid persecution, that the Nizari branch emerged under Hassan-i Sabbah. Hassan-i Sabbah's interpretation. Hassan was not only a strategist but also a thinker. His vision of faith was uncompromising. He insisted on obedience to the imam, whom he considered divinely guided, and he shaped the community at Alamut into a fortress of both stone and doctrine. For Hassan, the faith was not only about rituals or laws. It was about discovering the hidden meaning behind the Quran and the traditions. Ismaili philosophy taught that scriptures contained both an outer layer, zahir, the literal meaning, and an inner layer, batin, the secret truths accessible only to those properly initiated. To grasp the batin was to move closer to God's ultimate reality. This idea transformed the lives of his followers. They were not simply obeying orders, they believed they were participating in a cosmic struggle, guided by knowledge hidden from the ordinary world. When a Fidai, one of the self-sacrificing devotees, was sent on a mission, he was not only acting as an assassin. He was performing an act of spiritual obedience, part of a divine plan beyond human comprehension. Esoteric knowledge. The assassins placed great value on learning. Contrary to the image of blind fanatics, their communities studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The Ismaili tradition encouraged intellectual exploration, seeing science and reason not as enemies of faith, but as tools to uncover God's order in the universe. At Alamut, chronicles speak of a vast library, filled with texts from across the Muslim world and beyond. Though much of it was destroyed when the Mongols captured the fortress in the 13th century, its memory lingers as testimony to the intellectual life of the Nizaris. This pursuit of knowledge was not an ornament, it was integral to their understanding of faith. For them, to learn was to draw closer to the hidden truths of creation. Devotion and obedience. The most striking feature of assassin philosophy was loyalty. To follow the imam was not optional, it was absolute. Hassan-i Sabbah enforced this principle ruthlessly. Obedience was not only a matter of community discipline, it was a spiritual necessity. To disobey was to step out of the light of divine guidance. This explains why the Fiduas could walk calmly to their deaths. They believed that their sacrifice was not loss but fulfillment, an offering that connected them directly to the imam's mission. To outsiders, this looked like madness or drug-induced frenzy. To the assassins themselves, it was clarity. The world was a temporary illusion, and to serve faithfully was to align with eternal truth. Misunderstandings and myths. It was this aspect of assassin philosophy that gave rise to some of the strangest myths. Crusaders returning to Europe told stories of secret gardens where initiates were drugged with hashish and made to believe they had glimpsed paradise. Upon waking, they were told that obedience to the master could return them to that bliss, and so they served without question. Modern historians see these tales as exaggerations or fabrications, products of misunderstanding and propaganda. The Arabic word Hashashin, possibly used by enemies as an insult, may have contributed to the confusion. What mattered more than drugs or illusions was the psychological and spiritual discipline of the order. The assassins did not need narcotics to inspire devotion. Their philosophy was powerful enough. The balance of faith and strategy. The philosophy of the assassins was not isolated from their politics. Their faith guided their tactics. To them, killing a tyrant was not merely a political act but a religious duty. To strike fear into powerful oppressors was to defend their community and honor God's will. Yet they were not indiscriminate. Unlike bandits or raiders, the assassins targeted carefully. Their philosophy demanded precision. Every act had symbolic as well as practical meaning. When they struck, it was not only to remove an enemy but to demonstrate the power of belief over brute strength. Legacy of their ideas. Though their fortress fell, the ideas of the assassins survived. Today, the Ismaili community continues as a branch of Shura-e-Islam, led by the Aga Khan. They no longer live in mountain fortresses or practice political violence, but their tradition of valuing both faith and knowledge endures. For historians and dreamers alike, the philosophy of the assassins remains a reminder of how deeply belief can shape history. Their blades may be remembered, but it was their ideas, the conviction that truth lies beneath the surface, that obedience to the divine is absolute, that made them more than just killers. Closing thoughts. As we linger on their philosophy, let the image form in your mind: a mountain fortress at night, its halls lit by oil lamps, its chambers filled with scholars reading by candlelight, its disciples whispering prayers to the unseen imam. Outside, the world called them heretics, fanatics, assassins. Inside, they saw themselves as seekers of truth, guardians of hidden wisdom. This is the paradox of the assassins, both feared killers and devoted philosophers, both shadows and seekers of light. Their philosophy was the invisible thread that held their world together, the reason why a small community could stand against empires. And as you drift into thought, remember, sometimes the sharpest weapon is not the dagger in the dark, but the belief that guides the hand that holds it. The world of the assassins was never open to outsiders. To understand them fully, one must enter a world of secrecy, ritual, and dedication, a world where trust was earned only through trial and devotion. The true power of Hassanai Sabbah's order lay not only in their daggers but in the intricate system of initiation that bound each member to a lifetime of loyalty. This system was designed carefully, with an almost architectural precision, echoing the physical structure of Alamut itself. Just as the fortress was built to protect and hide its secrets, so too were the minds of the disciples shaped and fortified. Only those who were prepared, tested, and deemed worthy were allowed to carry out the most dangerous missions, the ones that would define the legend of the assassins. The path of the Fidei. The term Fidei means one who sacrifices himself. It was the highest level of initiation in the Nizari order, reserved for those who had proven themselves utterly loyal. But becoming a Fidei was not a matter of age, lineage, or strength. It was a matter of mind, spirit, and unwavering faith. The path began with years of study and observation. New recruits, often young men, were taken under the guidance of experienced mentors. They learned the doctrines of the Ismaili faith, memorized sacred texts, and trained in patience, endurance, and the art of concealment. The emphasis was always on discipline. Every thought, every action, every hesitation was measured. Mentors watched their pupils closely, observing not just their skill but their temperament. Could the recruit endure hardship without complaint? Could he resist fear in the face of danger? Could he obey instructions without question, even if the outcome seemed perilous? These were the qualities that distinguished an ordinary follower from one destined to walk the path of the Fidei. Secrecy and trust. Secrecy was the lifeblood of the order. Information was shared on a strict need-to-know basis. Each member understood that knowledge was both a privilege and a responsibility. A slip of the tongue, a careless revelation, could endanger the entire network. The initiates were often tested through missions that seemed simple, sometimes deceptively mundane. They might be sent to deliver messages, observe an enemy, or retrieve information. Each task was designed not only to train skills but to build trust. Failure was instructive. Success was rewarded with greater responsibility and access to deeper knowledge. To outsiders, these practices may have seemed extreme, even cruel. But within the order, they were a means of survival. The assassins operated in a world where betrayal could mean death, not only for the individual but for the entire community. Loyalty was not optional, it was life itself. Levels of initiation. The Nizari hierarchy was layered and precise. At the lowest level were the novices, those who had entered the order but were still learning its ways. Above them were the disciples, more experienced followers who had demonstrated skill and obedience. At the apex stood the Fideis, the self-sacrificing elite, ready to carry out the most dangerous assignments. Each level corresponded not only to ability, but to understanding of the order's philosophy. The higher the rank, the deeper the access to secret teachings and esoteric knowledge. The initiates were gradually introduced to the baton, the inner truths of the faith, so that by the time they reached the highest level, they were as much philosophers as warriors. Rituals and symbolism. Initiation was never casual. Rituals played a central role, reinforcing the spiritual and psychological bonds that held the community together. While specific details are lost to history, chroniclers describe ceremonies that emphasized obedience, sacrifice, and the sacred duty to the imam. These rituals served multiple purposes. They were a demonstration of commitment, a training in discipline, and a means of transmitting authority and knowledge. They also helped to instill courage, ensuring that when a Fidei was sent on a mission, fear would not paralyze him. The ritual, the oath, the sacred act, they were all preparation for facing death with serenity. The myth of the Paradise Gardens. Perhaps the most famous, yet misunderstood, aspect of assassin initiation is the legend of the so-called Paradise Gardens. European chroniclers claimed that Hashashin would lead young recruits into secret gardens filled with intoxicants and illusions of paradise, convincing them that obedience would return them to bliss. Modern historians largely reject the more fantastic elements of these tales. It is more plausible that the stories were propaganda, exaggerating the sect's methods to frighten enemies and captivate imaginations. What remains clear, however, is that initiation involved a profound psychological transformation. The disciples learned to trust their leaders completely, to embrace selflessness, and to internalize the philosophy that guided every act of the order. Psychological conditioning. The training of the Fido I relied on more than physical skill. Psychological conditioning was central. Recruits were taught patience, observation, and self-control. They learned to manage fear, to act decisively, and to accept uncertainty. Exercises may have included simulated missions, prolonged periods of isolation, and rigorous meditation. Through this careful shaping of the mind, the assassins produced followers capable of extraordinary feats. Ordinary soldiers, relying on numbers or brute force, could not compare to the precision, focus, and devotion of a properly trained Fido I. In this way, the order multiplied its influence far beyond its size. Loyalty beyond life. Perhaps the most striking feature of the assassin initiation system was the notion of absolute, transcendent loyalty. A Fido I was not only committed to the mission or the community, he was committed to a principle, to an ideal, to the vision of Hashashin and the divine guidance of the Imam. This loyalty explains the dramatic stories of assassinations carried out in full view of enemies, without hesitation or fear. To the Fido I, the act was not violence for its own sake, but a sacred duty. Death was not a failure. It was the final act of obedience, the ultimate demonstration of faith. The invisible strength. The genius of the assassin system was that it allowed a small community to wield influence far beyond its size. Initiation created a network of minds bound together by philosophy, ritual, and loyalty. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were instruments of a vision, capable of striking unpredictably and instilling fear without ever revealing the full scope of their power. It was a system that required patience, intellect, and an understanding of human nature. The assassins became experts in leverage, in subtlety, and in the art of shaping perception. By controlling the minds of their followers, Hashashin and his successors controlled the very perception of power in the region. Closing thoughts. As you imagine the halls of Alamut at night, filled with the whispers of initiates, consider the depth of what you have seen. These were not mere killers. They were philosophers, strategists, and masters of the mind, bound together by a system designed to create loyalty beyond reason and courage beyond fear. The blade may have been the visible instrument, but the true weapon of the assassins was their initiation, their training, and their belief. In the shadowy world of the assassins, power was measured not by armies or fortresses alone, but by fear and influence. Their true strength lay in their ability to strike unpredictably, to project a presence far larger than their actual numbers, and to shape the actions of kings, sultans, and generals with a single well-placed act. Understanding the tactics of terror requires stepping into the subtle interplay between psychology, strategy, and devotion that defined the Nizari Ismaili order. The assassins did not rely on open warfare. They avoided pitched battles, preferring instead the careful selection of targets and the timing of their strikes. Each act was calculated, symbolic, and aimed to achieve maximum impact. The term fidei, one who sacrifices himself, was not merely an expression of faith, it was a tactical designation. Each mission required absolute precision, courage, and the ability to vanish as suddenly as one appeared. The art of assassination. To the medieval mind, an assassin was both terrifying and mysterious. Stories circulated of men appearing suddenly in palaces or courts, delivering death to a ruler or commander and disappearing without trace. European chroniclers called them masters of intrigue, devotees of the unseen, and sometimes agents of the devil. Yet the reality was grounded in discipline and meticulous planning. Each operation began with observation. Targets were studied for months or even years. Patterns of movement, habits, weaknesses, and routines were catalogued in the minds of the fidois. Preparation was thorough, and the element of surprise was paramount. A strike was never random, it was surgical, aimed not only at eliminating an enemy but also at sending a clear message. Unlike conventional soldiers, the assassins did not need armies to create power. Fear, when carefully cultivated, could outweigh force. A single well-executed act could destabilize entire regions, forcing rulers to act cautiously, negotiate, or even change alliances. The psychological impact of these acts became a weapon in itself. Strategic targets. The assassins were highly selective in their choice of victims. They did not attack indiscriminately. Targets were chosen based on political, religious, or social significance. The aim was to remove individuals whose death would create maximum strategic advantage or enforce justice as defined by the order. High-profile assassinations served multiple purposes. They protected the community by eliminating threats, intimidated enemies to deter aggression, and reinforced the mystique of the assassin's reach. Chroniclers recorded the fear that spread through courts when news of a fidoi's success reached distant lands. A ruler never knew when or where an assassin might strike next, and this uncertainty magnified the order's influence far beyond its numbers. Methods and tools. Contrary to some popular myths, the assassins did not rely on exotic drugs, secret poisons, or supernatural means. Their strength was in discipline, observation, and knowledge of human behavior. The dagger was the most common weapon, simple, concealable, and efficient. Stealth, timing, and the element of surprise were their primary tools. Disguises and deception were often employed. A fidoi might pose as a servant, merchant, or scholar to approach his target. Escape routes were planned in advance, with the safety of the operative and the secrecy of the mission always paramount. Even when captured, fidois were trained to remain silent, protecting their comrades and the order itself. Psychological warfare. The assassins understood that the mind could be more powerful than armies. Fear was a carefully cultivated weapon. Stories of sudden deaths, of men vanishing as if by magic, spread quickly. A ruler's hesitation, anxiety, or paranoia could alter the outcome of wars or negotiations more than 1,000 soldiers. This psychological warfare was amplified by rumors and legend. Tales of the Paradise Gardens, of death-defying courage, and of supernatural loyalty made enemies uncertain and followers devoted. Even without a single battle, the assassins shaped the political landscape of the Middle East through the mere reputation of their order. The role of devotion. Every act of terror was underpinned by faith. The fidoi did not act out of personal ambition or greed. Each mission was a sacred duty, a fulfillment of the divine plan as interpreted by the Imam and Hassanai Sabah. This spiritual dimension made the assassins uniquely effective. Ordinary assassins might falter under fear or temptation, but a fidoi had been trained to accept death calmly, to see it as part of obedience and spiritual fulfillment. Devotion amplified their effectiveness. When a follower believed completely in the righteousness of his mission, he became capable of extraordinary focus, patience, and courage. A single individual could strike with precision and disappear without trace, creating fear disproportionate to their number. Historical examples. Some of the most famous assassinations attributed to the assassins involved high-ranking political and religious figures. Chroniclers record the deaths of Seljuk viziers, military commanders, and even crusader leaders. Each act was both tactical and symbolic. The goal was never mere violence. The message was always clear. No one, however powerful, was beyond reach, and loyalty and courage could defy empires. The stories of these acts spread far and wide, reaching Europe, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. Each tale enhanced the reputation of the assassins, making fear itself a tool of influence. Integration with strategy. The tactics of terror were not isolated, they were part of a larger strategy. The assassins maintained alliances, negotiated truces, and sometimes withdrew entirely when necessary. Assassination was a tool among many, carefully applied to maximize effect without exposing the community to unnecessary risk. This combination of stealth, discipline, psychological insight, and selective violence created a system where a small, committed group could challenge the might of empires. The balance of faith, philosophy, and practical strategy allowed the assassins to survive for decades, shaping history quietly but powerfully. Legacy of tactics. The precision and strategy of the assassins left a lasting legacy. Modern intelligence operations, espionage, and even the concept of targeted elimination echo the principles developed at Alamut. Their understanding of psychology, loyalty, and influence demonstrated that power does not always lie in armies but in perception, timing, and the willingness to act with absolute resolve. Even centuries after the fall of their fortresses, the shadow of their tactics lingers. The word assassin itself carries the resonance of precision, fear, and the hidden hand of a small but disciplined group. Their methods remind us that the most effective strategies are often invisible, known only to those who walk the path of discipline and belief. Closing thoughts. As you imagine the mountains and valleys surrounding Alamut, picture the quiet preparation of a Fido eye, observing his target, calculating every movement, waiting patiently for the moment that could change the course of history. This is the essence of assassin tactics: patient, precise, and terrifyingly effective. By the late 11th and early 12th centuries, the Middle East had become a theater of immense turmoil. The Crusades, launched from Europe with vows of holy conquest, swept through the Levant, creating a complex web of conflict, diplomacy, and intrigue. Amid this chaos, the assassins, residing high in their mountain fortresses like Alamut, found themselves unexpectedly in contact with a foreign and unfamiliar force: the Crusaders. The interaction between the assassins and the Crusaders was not a straightforward military engagement. The assassins were few, while the Crusaders brought armies, fortifications, and the zeal of religious conquest. Yet the assassins wielded influence in ways subtle and profound, proving that even a small, disciplined group could impact the ambitions of powerful kingdoms. Early encounters. Historical records suggest that the first interactions were cautious. The assassins observed the Crusaders, studied their movements, and assessed their intentions. Unlike local Muslim rulers, who were often forced into immediate confrontation, the assassins relied on patience and selective action. They did not seek open war. Their philosophy and tactics emphasized precision and influence rather than mass combat. European chroniclers, hearing reports of mysterious Eastern sectarians, were both fascinated and terrified. Tales of hidden assassins, disappearing into the night after eliminating key leaders, spread quickly through crusader camps. The reputation of the assassins became a psychological weapon, casting long shadows over negotiations and battles alike. Strategic diplomacy. The assassins understood the value of alliances. They were not bound by nationalism or ethnic ties but by survival and principle. At times, they negotiated truces with crusader leaders, offering mutual non-aggression in exchange for political advantage. These arrangements allowed the assassins to maintain their fortresses and continue their operations without provoking overwhelming retaliation. Such diplomacy required shrewdness and subtlety. Crusader leaders, unfamiliar with the intricate politics of the region, sometimes underestimated the assassin's influence. Yet, even a single assassination of a prominent figure could reshape alliances, force strategic withdrawals, or prevent attacks, demonstrating the assassin's ability to wield power without engaging in open combat. Notable assassinations. Several high-profile assassinations occurred during this period, leaving lasting impressions on European and Muslim chroniclers alike. One famous example involves Conrad of Montferrat, a crusader leader whose sudden death, attributed to the assassins, dramatically shifted the balance of power in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. These acts were more than violence. They were messages. The assassins struck with precision, ensuring that every killing reinforced the perception of an invisible, all-seeing hand. Crusaders began to fear not only the physical presence of enemies but the unseen network of spies and devoted followers capable of reaching anywhere, at any time. Psychological warfare against crusaders. The assassins excelled in psychological warfare. Crusader armies, unfamiliar with the local terrain and reliant on numbers, found themselves unnerved by rumors of the assassin's reach. The perception of danger, amplified by tales of sudden deaths and mysterious disappearances, had tangible effects. Hesitation in battle, strained alliances, and heightened paranoia among commanders. This was intentional. Hassan I-Sabah and his successors understood that fear could be as effective as swords. The Crusaders' uncertainty often prevented them from acting decisively, allowing the assassins to maintain autonomy in their mountainous strongholds. Integration with local politics. The assassins also navigated a complex network of Muslim rulers. The Seljuks, Fatimids, and local emirs all had competing interests. By selectively eliminating certain leaders and negotiating with others, the assassins influenced outcomes without confronting any one power directly. Against the backdrop of the Crusades, this strategy was particularly effective. Crusaders often assumed that Muslim resistance was monolithic, but the reality was fragmented. The assassins thrived in this fragmentation, exploiting rivalries and manipulating perceptions. Their skill lay in subtlety, patience, and precise timing, never overreaching, always calculating the consequences of each act. Reputation and myth. Europeans returned with tales of a fanatical sect in the East, men trained to die for a cause, invisible, unstoppable, and operating according to mysterious doctrines. These accounts, though sometimes exaggerated, reinforced the assassin's legendary aura. Crusaders began to associate every sudden death, every unexpected political shift, with the hidden hand of the assassins. Even chroniclers who had never witnessed their operations firsthand amplified the mystery. Tales of secret gardens, of total devotion, of invulnerability in battle, painted the assassins as something almost supernatural. This reputation alone became a tool, allowing a small group to influence powerful leaders and entire armies. Lessons in strategy. The encounters with crusaders demonstrate the assassin's genius in asymmetric warfare. They did not need large armies or open battles to project power. Through precision, timing, and a careful cultivation of fear, a handful of devoted followers could dictate terms to rulers who commanded thousands. The tactics combined spiritual devotion, psychological insight, and political acumen. Each assassination was a lesson in restraint, discipline, and strategy. The assassin's effectiveness did not rely on luck but on training, observation, and a profound understanding of human behavior. Legacy of the clash. The legacy of these interactions is significant. Crusaders carried the legends of the assassins back to Europe, where the term assassin entered the lexicon. The tales influenced not only medieval thought but the imagination of generations, shaping perceptions of secret societies, spies, and devoted followers. Even centuries later, historians recognize the sophistication of the assassin's approach. The combination of faith, strategy, and precision created a model for influence that transcended mere military might. In a world dominated by large armies and open conflict, they proved that subtlety, timing, and psychological insight could achieve results that brute force could not. Closing thoughts. As night falls over the mountains and valleys of the Levant, imagine the quiet tension of this era. Crusader camps bristling with armor, local rulers plotting, and high above, the fortresses of the assassins, silent and vigilant. Within those walls, initiates prepare, observing the patterns of their enemies, waiting for the moment when faith, training, and precision converge. The clash with the Crusaders was not defined by mass battles but by invisible influence, by acts so precise and daring that their impact echoed far beyond the mountains. And it is in this subtle mastery that the true power of the assassins reveals itself, a lesson in strategy, faith, and the enduring force of reputation. While the assassins' dealings with the Crusaders captured the imagination of Europe, their more enduring and relentless engagements were often closer to home, within the complex tapestry of the Middle East. Here, in the rugged mountains and fertile valleys of Persia, the assassins confronted dynasties, rulers, and empires whose ambitions threatened their survival. The term assassin became as feared among Eastern sultans and emirs as it was among crusaders. Yet the order's influence was not solely maintained through fear. It was the combination of cunning strategy, unwavering loyalty, and a deep understanding of politics that allowed the Nizari Ismailis to survive, and even thrive, in a world dominated by greater numbers and more powerful armies. The Seljuk threat. The Seljuk Turks, dominant across Persia and Mesopotamia in the 11th and 12th centuries, represented one of the greatest threats to the assassins. Their armies were vast, disciplined, and capable of laying siege to mountain fortresses. The assassins, by contrast, were few in number and geographically dispersed. To confront them directly would have been suicidal. Instead, the assassins adopted a strategy of selective engagement. They monitored the movements of Seljuk leaders, identified the most dangerous individuals, and removed them when necessary. This was not mindless killing. It was targeted intervention designed to weaken the cohesion of opposing forces while preserving their own limited resources. High-profile assassinations among the Seljuk elite sent messages that transcended geography. Governors, military commanders, and even sultans themselves became aware that no fortress or palace could shield them from the reach of the Fidei. This perception of omnipresence was carefully cultivated, enhancing the order's psychological influence. Mountain fortresses as strongholds. Alamut was not the only fortress. Across northern Persia, a network of strongholds, each perched on seemingly inaccessible cliffs, formed the backbone of the assassin's survival. Rudkin, Lamsar, and Girdku, among others, were carefully chosen for their defensibility. Each fortress was more than stone and mortar. It was a training ground, a repository of knowledge, and a refuge. Within their walls, the assassins could plan missions, educate recruits, and endure sieges. These fortresses allowed the order to operate independently, projecting power while remaining virtually untouchable. The geography of the region played to their advantage. Steep cliffs, hidden passes, and natural barriers made conventional military assaults costly and often futile. The assassins understood that their strength lay not in numbers, but in choosing the ground on which battles could not be easily waged. Political intrigue. The assassins' engagement with Eastern powers was as much about diplomacy and manipulation as it was about assassination. They cultivated alliances when possible, leveraged rivalries when necessary, and ensured that no single enemy could consolidate power without considering the potential threat of the Nazaris. Local rulers, wary of provoking the assassins, often negotiated truces or made concessions. A well-timed elimination of a Seljuk vizier or a rival emir could alter the balance of power dramatically, without drawing the order into direct confrontation. In this way, the assassins operated not as conquerors but as master tacticians, shaping outcomes through subtle intervention rather than open war. The doctrine of precision. Every act against Eastern rulers was guided by the same philosophy that defined the order. Precision, patience, and observation were paramount. Unlike armies that relied on numbers, the assassins relied on intelligence, stealth, and devotion. A single Fido eye could achieve what hundreds of soldiers could not. This doctrine extended beyond the battlefield. The selection of targets, the timing of interventions, and the communication of threats were all calculated to maximize strategic effect. A ruler might never see the hand that struck against him, but the outcome would reinforce the reputation of the assassins and the perceived omnipotence of their network. Psychological domination. Fear remained the assassin's most effective tool. Stories of invisible agents capable of appearing anywhere circulated widely among rulers and soldiers alike. The mere possibility of assassination influenced decision-making, prompting caution, hesitation, and even submission. This psychological domination was achieved without massive armies or overt displays of force. The perception of control, carefully nurtured, allowed the assassins to punch far above their weight. Their enemies could not ignore them, yet could rarely engage them directly. This balance of invisibility and impact became a hallmark of the Order's Eastern campaigns. Challenges and setbacks. Survival was never guaranteed. The assassins faced numerous challenges, including betrayal, internal dissent, and the ambitions of overwhelming empires. Mongol invasions, internal rivalries, and occasional defections threatened to unravel their carefully constructed network. Yet the principles of initiation, devotion, and discipline helped the community endure. Even when fortresses were attacked or lost, the system allowed knowledge, loyalty, and operational capability to persist. This resilience was a testament not only to the physical fortifications but to the philosophy that guided every member of the order. Cultural and religious influence. The assassins were more than warriors, they were a religious and cultural force. Their devotion to the Ismaili faith, combined with their emphasis on education, philosophy, and secrecy, shaped their interactions with both rulers and common people. Knowledge was power, and the Nizaris cultivated it alongside loyalty. Their religious identity allowed them to present their actions as divine obedience. This spiritual dimension reinforced their authority within the community and magnified the fear they inspired in enemies. Every strike, every negotiation, and every fortress was imbued with meaning that extended beyond politics into the realm of sacred duty. Legacy of Eastern campaigns. The assassins' confrontations with Eastern powers demonstrate a remarkable application of asymmetric strategy. They were few, surrounded by powerful enemies, yet able to shape the political landscape through precision, psychology, and faith. Their influence persisted for decades, proving that a small, disciplined group could exert disproportionate power without conventional armies. The lessons of these campaigns resonate even today. Patience, strategy, and psychological insight often yield more influence than brute force. The assassins mastered these principles centuries ago, creating a legacy of subtle dominance that fascinated both contemporaries and historians alike. Closing thoughts. Picture Alamut and its sister fortresses at dawn, walls rising from cliffs, watchtowers scanning the valleys, and devoted followers preparing quietly for the day. In the minds of rulers and generals below, uncertainty reigns. Every move, every decision carries the shadow of an invisible hand, guided by discipline, faith, and the promise of precision. This was the essence of the assassin's power in the East. Subtle, pervasive, and enduring. They reshaped politics, inspired fear, and preserved a way of life that seemed impossible against overwhelming odds. For nearly 2 centuries, Alamut stood as the heart of the assassin order, perched atop its inaccessible cliffs in northern Persia. Within its walls, philosophy, devotion, and strategy intertwined to create a bastion of power that few dared to challenge directly. But no fortress, no matter how well defended or carefully planned, can remain untouched forever. The fall of Alamut was both dramatic and symbolic, marking the end of an era while preserving the enduring mystique of the assassins. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century changed the landscape of the Middle East irrevocably. Genghis Khan's descendants expanded eastward, conquering vast territories with overwhelming force. Cities and fortresses fell before their armies. And yet, Alamut, with its steep cliffs and intricate defenses, remained a formidable obstacle, a symbol of resistance, faith, and careful planning. The Mongol threat. The Mongols were unlike any adversary the assassins had faced before. Their armies were vast, highly mobile, and disciplined, capable of besieging cities and fortresses with relentless efficiency. For the assassins, who had relied on precision, stealth, and psychological influence, confronting such a force head-on was impossible. Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis, was tasked with subduing Persia and eliminating potential threats to Mongol authority. The Nizaris, with their network of fortresses and history of strategic assassinations, represented a significant challenge. Alamut became a focal point, both for its symbolic significance and for its strategic location in the mountainous terrain. The Mongols demanded surrender. Diplomacy, once a tool used effectively against Seljuks and crusaders, now faced an enemy indifferent to negotiation. Hulagu's forces were methodical, employing siege engines, overwhelming numbers, and relentless pressure to achieve what decades of politics and secrecy had preserved. Siege and surrender. Alamut's defenses were legendary. Towers, walls, and narrow passes made direct assault difficult. The assassins relied on the natural geography, combined with careful stockpiling of provisions and knowledge of terrain, to endure prolonged attacks. Yet the Mongols were patient and unrelenting. Chroniclers describe the methodical approach, surrounding the fortress, cutting off supplies, and using psychological tactics to wear down defenders. Even the most disciplined warriors faced limits when confronted with such overwhelming force. Eventually, in 1256, Alamut fell. According to historical records, the surrender was negotiated to preserve lives, particularly those of non-combatants and scholars within the fortress. The physical stronghold was destroyed, libraries burned, and the immediate political power of the assassins eliminated. The human cost. The fall of Alamut was not merely a military defeat, it was a profound psychological and cultural shock. Generations of knowledge, accumulated over decades, were lost in the flames. The psychological impact on surviving members and local communities was immense. Yet, remarkably, the ideas and networks of the assassins did not vanish entirely. Survivors carried the teachings, philosophies, and loyalties into exile. Some communities continued in remote regions, preserving the Ismaili faith and the memory of their leaders. Though the Mongols had destroyed the fortress, they could not eradicate the spirit and intellectual legacy of the order. Symbolism of the fall. Alamut's fall became a symbol both of vulnerability and of enduring legend. For enemies, it demonstrated that even the most fortified positions could eventually be overcome. For followers and historians, it reinforced the enduring power of ideas over mere stone walls. The legend of Alamut, as both a fortress and a spiritual center, grew in the aftermath. European accounts romanticized the mysteries of the assassins, while local traditions preserved stories of courage, loyalty, and devotion. Even in defeat, the aura of the order, its philosophy, discipline, and mystique, remained intact. Legacy after destruction. The destruction of Alamut did not signify the end of the Nizari Ismailis. While their military power was curtailed, the community adapted. They migrated, integrated, and preserved their faith and teachings in secrecy. Over centuries, the Ismaili tradition continued, eventually evolving under modern leadership into a global religious community led by the Aga Khan. The methods of the assassins, discipline, psychological influence, and strategic patience, remained influential as historical lessons. Their ability to survive in extreme conditions, shape political events, and maintain cohesion through ideology and training offers enduring insights into strategy, loyalty, and resilience. Cultural and historical resonance. The story of Alamut transcends its geographic and temporal confines. It inspired later generations, fueling myths, literature, and imagination. Marco Polo, traveling centuries later, chronicled tales of the assassin's secret gardens, although these were likely embellished. Nonetheless, the allure of the order, part philosophy, part strategy, part mystique, captured imaginations across cultures. Historians continue to study Alamut not merely as a fortress, but as a symbol of the complex interplay between faith, strategy, and psychological influence. It demonstrates that power is not solely measured by armies or walls, but by discipline, intellectual depth, and the capacity to inspire devotion in others. Closing thoughts. As dusk settles over the mountains where Alamut once stood, imagine the echo of candles in scholarly halls, the whispered oaths of initiates, and the quiet observation of faithful followers. The fortress may have crumbled, but the essence of the assassins, precision, devotion, and subtle influence, remains a shadow in history. Their fall reminds us that even the mightiest structures are mortal, but ideas, philosophy, and disciplined networks endure. The assassins of Alamut leave a legacy not of mere destruction, but of intellectual resilience, spiritual devotion, and strategic brilliance, a story that continues to captivate the mind and imagination even centuries later. The assassins, with their mountain fortresses, secretive rituals, and dramatic missions, inspired stories that crossed continents and centuries. Legends of paradise gardens, drug-induced devotion, and invisible killers circulated widely, creating an aura of mystery that often overshadowed the historical reality. To understand the assassins fully, one must explore both the myths that enshrouded them and the truths that underpinned their enduring reputation. Even during their lifetime, the order's secrecy fueled speculation. European travelers, returning from the Levant, recounted tales that were part truth, part imagination. The word Hashashin entered European languages, often mistranslated and misunderstood, giving rise to the notion that assassins were under the influence of intoxicants. Modern historians suggest this was likely a slander intended to undermine the legitimacy of the Nizari Ismailis, painting them as fanatics rather than disciplined strategists. The Paradise Garden Myth. One of the most famous myths involves the so-called Paradise Garden. According to legend, initiates were taken to an opulent garden filled with delights and pleasures, experiencing a simulated paradise. Upon awakening, they were told that obedience to the order could return them to this bliss. This story, though repeated in European chronicles, is now widely regarded as exaggerated or fictional. However, the myth reflects an important truth about the assassin's psychological sophistication. Initiates underwent intense training, meditation, and ritual, learning to master fear, focus on objectives, and internalize obedience. While there were no literal gardens of paradise, the psychological and spiritual experience of initiation may have inspired stories of blissful gardens, illustrating the profound transformation recruits underwent. Legends across Europe. As tales of the assassins spread across Europe, their reputation grew. Crusaders, merchants, and chroniclers described an invisible force capable of striking anyone, anywhere. They became symbols of fear, secrecy, and precision, capturing the imagination of writers and storytellers. In the medieval mind, the assassins were almost supernatural. A single, devoted follower could infiltrate courts, dispatch rulers, and vanish without a trace. These stories reinforced the mystique of the order, making them a subject of fascination and horror alike. Even accounts from travelers who had never seen an assassin firsthand contributed to a web of legend that would endure for centuries. Misunderstandings and exaggerations. Many of the tales surrounding the assassins were shaped by misunderstanding. Their strict hierarchy, ritualized obedience, and philosophical depth were interpreted as fanaticism. Outsiders often mistook discipline for mind control, strategy for magic, and devotion for madness. The term assassin itself, derived from Hashashin, became synonymous in European languages with secret killing, precision, and treachery. The Nizari Ismailis, however, were disciplined philosophers and strategists, whose actions were guided by principles and faith rather than chaos or whim. Yet, these misunderstandings enhanced their reputation. Fear is a powerful force, and the assassins harnessed the fear inspired by rumor, legend, and precision to maintain influence far beyond their actual numbers. Historical figures in myth. Over time, legendary figures emerged. Hassanai-Sabah, for example, became a symbol of cunning, intellect, and devotion. Stories depicted him as a master manipulator, a philosopher-warrior capable of orchestrating events across mountains and empires. Similarly, individual fighters became legendary for their courage and loyalty. Tales of their stealth, bravery, and calm acceptance of death were recounted in chronicles, blending historical fact with dramatic narrative. These stories inspired generations, feeding into literature, poetry, and even later fiction, where the archetype of the stealthy, devoted agent persists. The assassins in popular culture. Centuries after Alamut fell, the assassins continued to capture imagination. Writers, travelers, and historians contributed to an evolving narrative, sometimes factual, sometimes fantastical. From medieval romances to modern novels and films, the image of the assassin as a mysterious, disciplined, and deadly figure remains compelling. The blend of fact and myth has made the assassins emblematic of a particular kind of power: subtle, precise, and intellectually grounded. They demonstrate that influence does not always require armies, but can be achieved through discipline, strategy, and the cultivation of reputation. Truth behind the legends. Beneath the myths lies a remarkable reality. The assassins were not drugged fanatics or supernatural beings. They were dedicated, highly trained, and philosophically grounded. Their network was disciplined, their tactics precise, and their influence enduring. The legends, while exaggerated, point to the effectiveness of their methods and the extraordinary cohesion of their society. Initiation, loyalty, and psychological mastery were the true foundations of their power. The myths amplified this reality, ensuring that their name would inspire both fear and admiration long after the fall of their fortresses. Lessons from myth and history. Studying both the legends and the historical record reveals a nuanced picture. The assassins combined philosophy, devotion, and strategic insight to achieve results disproportionate to their numbers. Their story demonstrates the power of perception, the importance of loyalty, and the enduring influence of disciplined action. Even today, the balance between fact and myth continues to fascinate. Understanding the assassins requires separating embellished tales from historical truth, while appreciating the ways in which legend reinforced their influence across centuries and continents. Closing thoughts. Imagine, then, the quiet mountains of Persia, long after Alamut's walls fell, where stories of daring, devotion, and mystery linger. The mythic gardens, the fearless fighters, the unseen hand of Hassanai-Sabah. These images, though often exaggerated, preserve the essence of the assassin's impact. They remind us that history is shaped not only by armies and rulers but by ideas, loyalty, and the carefully nurtured perceptions of fear and respect. The assassin's legends endure because they capture a profound truth. Disciplined belief and strategic precision can make even the smallest force seem unstoppable. Though the physical strongholds of the assassins have long since crumbled, and their immediate political influence faded with the Mongol invasions, the legacy of Hassanai-Sabah and his followers endures in ways both subtle and profound. The lessons of strategy, psychological mastery, loyalty, and precision continue to resonate centuries later, influencing political thought, literature, and even modern concepts of intelligence and covert operations. The story of the assassins is a testament to the idea that a small, disciplined group, guided by ideology and devotion, can shape the course of history far beyond its size. Their influence was not measured in acres of territory or number of soldiers, but in the fear and respect they inspired, the alliances they manipulated, and the subtle shifts in power that occurred because of their actions. Strategic and psychological lessons. The assassins demonstrated that perception can be as powerful as reality. European and Middle Eastern rulers alike feared them not only for what they could physically do but for what they represented, an unseen, ever-present threat capable of acting with precision at any time. This understanding of psychological leverage is reflected in modern strategy, where influence and perception can determine outcomes without open conflict. Their methods also highlight the importance of loyalty, training, and preparation. Each Fido I underwent rigorous initiation, both physical and psychological, that allowed him to act decisively, calmly, and with focus. Modern military and intelligence operations often echo this principle. Success depends not on sheer numbers alone, but on the disciplined execution of carefully honed skills and strategies. Influence on intelligence and covert operations. Historians often view the assassins as precursors to modern intelligence networks and covert operations. Their use of observation, infiltration, and precision elimination of key figures mirrors techniques used in espionage and special operations centuries later. While the methods have evolved with technology, the fundamental principles, patience, discretion, knowledge of human behavior, and decisive action, remain strikingly similar. The assassin's emphasis on secrecy and compartmentalized knowledge also offers lessons in organizational resilience. Even when a fortress fell or a community was threatened, the core principles, philosophy, and operational capabilities survived. Modern intelligence networks similarly rely on distributed, compartmentalized structures to endure disruption. Cultural and literary impact. The legend of the assassins has inspired countless works of literature, film, and popular culture. From Marco Polo's medieval chronicles to contemporary novels and video games, the figure of the assassin, a disciplined, unseen operative operating with loyalty and precision, has become a powerful archetype. These cultural depictions, while often dramatized, capture the essence of the order, a combination of intellect, discipline, and devotion. The mythos continues to captivate imaginations, demonstrating the enduring fascination with secret societies, strategic mastery, and the interplay of fear and respect in human societies. Religious and philosophical legacy. Beyond their military and political influence, the assassins left a profound religious and philosophical legacy. As Nizari Ismailis, their devotion to the Imam, the study of doctrine, and the cultivation of ethical and spiritual discipline were central to their identity. These principles guided their actions, informed their decisions, and bound their community together. Today, the Ismaili community continues to reflect aspects of these teachings in their emphasis on education, social responsibility, and intellectual development. While the days of daggers and mountain fortresses are long past, the philosophical underpinnings remain a living legacy. Lessons in leadership and discipline. The assassins exemplify the power of disciplined leadership. Hassan I-Sabbah and his successors created a society where authority was earned through knowledge, devotion, and performance rather than birth or wealth. Initiates understood their responsibilities deeply, and the bonds of loyalty allowed the order to operate effectively under extreme pressure. Modern organizations, whether in military, corporate, or social contexts, can draw lessons from this model. Clear purpose, disciplined training, ethical grounding, and a shared philosophy can enable small teams to achieve results far beyond their apparent capacity. Enduring mystique. Even today, the word assassin evokes precision, danger, and mystery. The fear and respect inspired by the Nizari Ismailis centuries ago persist in collective imagination. This enduring mystique is a testament to their skill in combining strategy, faith, and psychological insight. Their story demonstrates that the most powerful influence is often invisible, operating quietly yet decisively. From the mountains of Persia to the pages of literature and the screens of modern media, the assassins continue to captivate. They remind us that history is shaped not only by brute force but by intellect, discipline, and the capacity to understand and influence human behavior. Modern reflections. The legacy of the assassins offers timeless insights. Their combination of strategy, faith, and psychological mastery is relevant to modern fields as diverse as leadership, military planning, intelligence, and organizational management. They exemplify how dedication, precision, and moral conviction can magnify influence, even when resources are limited. Moreover, their story encourages reflection on the interplay between reality and perception. The myths surrounding them, while sometimes exaggerated, enhanced their real-world power, showing that narrative, reputation, and psychological influence can shape outcomes as effectively as physical force. Closing thoughts. As night falls over the ancient mountains of Persia, imagine the silent fortresses where knowledge, devotion, and strategy once flourished. The walls may be gone, the soldiers long past, yet the legacy of the assassins endures. In their disciplined approach, their precise actions, and their enduring influence, we find lessons that resonate far beyond time and place. The assassins remind us that power is not merely about strength, numbers, or territory. True influence arises from preparation, loyalty, intellect, and the mastery of perception. Their story, both real and legendary, continues to teach, captivate, and inspire, a whisper across centuries, calling us to consider the enduring force of faith, discipline, and precision.